A 16-year-old black girl left home one Sunday morning in her white choir robe, Bible in hand, a stitched cross on her sleeve. She never arrived at church. Authorities dismissed her before they even looked. Her mother knew better. For 18 years, the case went cold. Then, inside a dusty pawn shop, that same robe appeared behind a glass case. Perfectly folded, perfectly preserved. The same robe her mother sewed by hand. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. 16-year-old Felicia Monroe always sang like she had wings in her throat. On Sundays, her voice rose above the other youth choir members at Zion AME Church like sunlight breaking through stained glass. Even when the sanctuary fans clacked and the Mississippi heat pressed down on every pew, Felicia's voice made people forget the sweat on their necks or the heaviness in their bones. Vivian Monroe stood in the kitchen that morning, watching her daughter adjust the white robe she'd ironed the night before. Vivian was 50 and wore her years like she wore her faith, tight around the shoulders but unshakable. She had raised Felicia alone since her husband passed of a stroke 5 years ago. Every Sunday, she pressed Felicia's robe, packed a sandwich for after service, and kissed her on the cheek before she left. "Don't forget your scarf, baby," Vivian called from the doorway. Felicia rolled her eyes but smiled. "Mama, I'm not a kid." Vivian chuckled. "That's right. You're a grown woman who still forgets her scarf every week." Felicia tossed it around her neck dramatically and kissed her mother's cheek. She grabbed her Bible and stepped outside into the soft bloom of spring. The church was only 6 blocks away. She always walked, past Mrs. Langley's porch with the potted lilies, past the Jackson twins playing jacks on the sidewalk, past the blue house with the broken swing. Vivian stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her daughter disappear down the block. It was a habit she never broke, watching her leave, like imprinting the moment in her memory. Just in case. The clock ticked past 8:30, then 9 o'clock. Church service had started. Vivian figured maybe they'd started early or Felicia had been asked to help in the back. Still, she found herself glancing toward the street every couple of minutes. By 9:45, she stepped out onto the porch again, scanning the sidewalk. No sign of her. She called the church office from the rotary phone. The secretary, Sister Lena, answered. Vivian asked if Felicia had come early. "No, ma'am," Lena said gently. "We thought maybe she wasn't feeling well." Vivian's chest tightened. She tried to remain calm. Maybe Felicia stopped by friends. Maybe she got sick on the way. Maybe. But the maybes began to thin out like smoke. By 11:15, she was walking the route Felicia always took. She stopped by the Jackson twins' house. Their grandmother said the boys hadn't been outside yet. She asked Mrs. Langley, who shook her head and held Vivian's hand with quiet worry. She checked the alleys. She checked the corners. She called out her daughter's name down empty side streets. By noon, Vivian Monroe walked into the Franklin Hollow Police Department, blouse damp with sweat, heart pounding like a fist in her chest. The receptionist didn't look up. "Missing persons form is on the clipboard," she said. Vivian filled it out with trembling hands. Name, Felicia Monroe. Age, 16. Last seen, 7:30 a.m. Location, Hawthorne Avenue, walking toward Zion AME Church. She was told to wait. 30 minutes later, a white man in a tan blazer approached. He was Detective Wallace Grimes, and he smelled faintly of menthols and impatience. "Your daughter's probably just out with a boy," he said, not unkindly, but with a tone that made Vivian bristle. "She doesn't do that," Vivian said, voice tight. "She was in a church." Grimes gave a slow nod, scratched his beard. "Sometimes girls get curious. They pull away. Not saying she's bad, just saying maybe she needed space." Vivian felt her stomach knot. "She's not a runaway." "Mrs. Monroe," he said, setting the form down, "I'll file this, but these things usually resolve in a day or two. You'll see." Vivian wanted to scream. Instead, she sat very still. "So what do you do now?" "Well, we wait. If she ain't back in 48 hours, we can canvass the area. But she's 16. Could be anywhere. You'd be surprised what some of these girls get into." "These girls." Vivian stood, trembling. "She is not these girls. She's my child. And she's missing." Grimes didn't look up as he waved her off. "We'll be in touch." She walked out into the hot sun with her fists clenched and her mind on fire. That night, she sat on Felicia's bed, staring at the hairbrush still warm from the morning, the pink scarf on the floor, the robe hanger still swinging slightly in the closet. She called Zion again. No one had seen her. No one knew anything. Vivian made 20 phone calls to friends, cousins, choir directors, and neighbors. She drove around until dusk with the windows down, calling Felicia's name until her voice cracked. The next morning, she returned to the police station. They had not filed a report. Grimes was in the field. By the end of the week, Vivian had made her own flyers, photocopied at the library with money from her grocery budget. She stapled them to telephone poles, handed them out at gas stations, even passed them to drivers at red lights. She stood in the church vestibule and made a plea for anyone with information to come forward. The congregation prayed, but the silence after the amen was heavy. 2 weeks in, a local reporter gave her a 30-second segment on the nightly news. The anchor called Felicia troubled and mentioned possible connections to local teenagers. Vivian never watched the news again. Detective Grimes never followed up. The file was marked inactive, then shelved. Vivian returned every month, sometimes every week, asking for updates. She was met with blank stares or quiet pity. By August, the case had faded into local memory. New headlines came. Another scandal. Another election. Another crime. But Vivian remembered. Every morning she woke up with the same thought. Maybe today. Every night she went to bed clutching the edge of Felicia's pillow, her tears soaking the cotton. And on Sundays, she sat in the same pew at Zion AME, staring at the empty choir stand. One chair, front row, center left, stayed vacant, because her daughter's voice still echoed there. And no matter what anyone said, Vivian knew. Felicia didn't run away. She was taken. The days after Felicia's disappearance were a blur of half-slept nights and open-ended prayers. Vivian Monroe kept her front door unlocked, just in case her baby came home. She left the porch light on every night. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe, right, without feeling like she was letting go of the last thread that might pull Felicia back to her. She went back to the police station on the 5th day. This time, she brought a manila envelope. Inside were photos of Felicia in her choir robe, Felicia at her Sweet 16 party just 2 months earlier, a school ID copy, and a list of all the streets she might have walked that morning. Vivian had circled the church path on a neighborhood map and even annotated it with handwritten notes. She handed it across the desk to the officer on duty. She didn't run, Vivian said again. This is not that kind of situation. The desk officer glanced inside, set the envelope aside, and offered a slow nod. Detective Grimes will get to it. Vivian stared. He hasn't called. He hasn't come to my house. He hasn't asked me a single question. He's working another case right now, the officer replied, eyes already drifting to the television mounted on the wall, where a baseball game played on mute. Vivian turned away, her whole body trembling. She felt like a ghost in her own town. By the 10th day, she stopped hoping the police would help. She launched her own search. She and Sister Lena printed fresh flyers. A local shop owner let her put one in the front window. A teenage boy from the church helped her tape posters on every telephone pole from Hawthorne Avenue to Sycamore Creek. Still, no one had seen a thing. One elderly woman on Sycamore, Miss Clarabelle, said she remembered a van parked by the alley that Sunday morning. Dark green. Sitting there too long, she whispered. Didn't look right. Vivian wrote it down and took it straight to the police station. Detective Grimes wasn't interested. Lots of vans out there, he said. Could have been anyone. Then why won't you find out who it was? He shrugged. Ma'am, we're working limited resources. Not like we got a whole department for this kind of thing. She's a child, Vivian snapped. A child is missing. Grimes gave a tired sigh. I got 2 robberies and a domestic assault this week. Girls like Felicia, sometimes they just disappear for a while. Usually come back. Regretful. Embarrassed. That kind of thing. Vivian stood up so fast her chair screeched. Girls like Felicia? He held up a hand. I didn't mean anything by it. Yes, you did, she said, voice shaking. You meant black. You meant fatherless. You meant poor. But what you didn't mean was worthy of your time. She left before she broke down in front of him. The next morning, Vivian walked into the newsroom of the Franklin Hollow Gazette. The receptionist blinked at her in surprise. Vivian placed Felicia's photo on the desk and asked to speak to a reporter. A young white woman named Maggie Doyle came out a few minutes later. Vivian repeated the entire story, start to finish. Maggie scribbled notes furiously, eyes wide. She asked about Felicia's personality, her habits, her goals. Vivian told her about the scholarships her daughter was eyeing, her dream of being a music teacher. She told her how Felicia practiced in front of the mirror with a hairbrush for a microphone. She told her about the time Felicia spent her allowance to buy a classmate new shoes after his got torn up. She's not a runaway, Vivian finished. She's good. She's kind. And I want people to know she mattered. Maggie promised to print the story. And she did, buried in the lower right corner of page 7, under a headline about a county fair. The article got Felicia's name out, but not the urgency. And it did little to shake the police from their complacency. Vivian contacted the NAACP chapter in Jackson. They gave her a list of lawyers, and one agreed to send a letter to the police department demanding action. Another offered advice. Get media involved outside the county. Try WLTV in Baton Rouge. Try WJXN in Jackson. Maybe someone would care. But the more she pushed, the more Franklin Hollow pulled back. Some neighbors whispered about her being too loud or making trouble. Some teachers at the high school started asking if Felicia had been acting out or falling in with the wrong crowd. A few mothers told their daughters not to walk with her before church anymore, as if her absence were contagious. Vivian saw it all, felt it all. It cut like glass. By week 3, she realized the police had filed her daughter away as just another gone girl. Not abducted, not hunted, not searched for, just erased. The church tried to help. Reverend Bell dedicated a service to Felicia. The choir sang her favorite hymn. Vivian sat in the second pew, clutching her daughter's Bible to her chest, barely breathing. One Sunday, after the service, a little girl came up to her and asked, "Miss Monroe, is Felicia still coming back?" Vivian knelt and looked the girl in the eye. "I don't know, baby, but I pray she does." At home, she replayed that morning again and again. The way Felicia smiled before leaving. The kiss on her cheek. The scarf she almost forgot. She began writing it down in a journal. Every detail she could remember. The time. The color of the sky. The smell of the air. Just in case someone would ever listen. But for now, no one did. Felicia Monroe had vanished. And the world around her acted like she was never there. The first year was the hardest, but they were all hard in different ways. The first year had noise. Noise from search efforts. Noise from the occasional phone call with a tip that led nowhere. Noise from the church, from the radio, from the community pretending to care. But that noise eventually faded. The second year brought silence. By 1987, Vivian Monroe was no longer the woman people saw and greeted in the pews. She had become the woman people avoided in the grocery store aisle. The woman who kept one hand on her heart and the other on the past. The woman still stapling sun-bleached flyers on a new poles, still visiting the police department on the first Monday of every month like a ritual. She had stopped expecting anything from them, but she couldn't stop going. It felt disloyal not to show up. She quit her job at the sewing shop. She'd taken too many days off, come in too many times red-eyed and hollow-voiced. The owner gently told her maybe she should take time. That time became forever. She took on mending jobs from home instead. Small, quiet work she could do with the TV humming in the background, even when she wasn't really watching. Felicia's room remained untouched. She dusted it weekly, changed the sheets monthly, wiped the windows until they shone. The closet was still half full. Dresses, church shoes, the pink coat she loved even when it was too warm to wear. Her favorite teddy bear still sat on the pillow, its ribbon necktie faded from sunlight. In 1992, Vivian started writing letters. They were addressed to Felicia, but never sent, never read by anyone but her. She kept them in a small chest at the foot of her daughter's bed. Some were long, rambling pages. Some were only a sentence. "Are you safe? Do you remember my voice? Today I passed by a girl who had your eyes. She smiled. I almost broke. In 1995, a reporter from Jackson reached out about a feature on cold cases in Mississippi. Vivian agreed, hopeful. The article mentioned Felicia in a single paragraph, next to 3 other missing children. There was no follow-up. Nothing came of it. In 1996, Vivian sat across from a new detective, someone young and polite who had taken over the cold file shelf. He nodded solemnly as she spoke, promised to revisit everything. She never heard from him again. When she returned a month later, she was told he'd been reassigned. Her grief became private. Public sadness made people uncomfortable. Even at church, well-meaning women offered soft condolences like prayers meant to soothe themselves. She's with God, wherever she is. Sometimes the Lord brings peace in other forms. Vivian would smile politely, but she wanted to scream, what if she's not with God? What if she's cold, scared, alone, waiting? By 1999, she had stopped praying for Felicia's return. Not because she gave up, but because she had started to believe that if Felicia were alive, she would have found a way to come home by now. The years had chipped away at that hope, reshaped it into something brittle. Now, she just prayed for answers. In 2000, Vivian had a stroke scare. She fell in the kitchen, dizzy and short of breath. The doctor told her it wasn't her heart. It was stress. Years of it. Unchecked, unhealed, unresolved. She was told to rest more. But rest was dangerous. It left space for thoughts. She began keeping a scrapbook. Clippings, old church programs with Felicia's name, even handwritten memories from her own journals. One page held the choir roster from 1985. Another had a photo of Felicia holding a birthday cake, laughing with frosting on her nose. Every morning, Vivian made tea and read a page from that scrapbook, as if grounding herself in proof that her daughter had lived. Had mattered. Still did. Then came 2003. Vivian was 60 now. Her knees ached. Her hands weren't as steady with a needle. The world had changed in ways she didn't understand. Cell phones, digital cameras, email. But some things hadn't changed. The pain in her chest when she walked past the church. The silence in the house after sunset. The feeling that somewhere, something had been left undone. That October, the water heater broke. She didn't have the money for a replacement. Her savings were nearly gone. So she did something she swore she'd never do. She opened the cedar jewelry box in her bedroom. Inside were her mother's earrings, the bracelet her late husband gave her on their wedding night, a gold locket that had once held a photo of her and Felicia. She packed them carefully into a cloth pouch and caught the bus to Delray, the next town over. There was a pawn shop there. She'd passed it 100 times. The sign above the shop door read C. Rowe and Sons Pawn and Trade. It was dusty, the windows cluttered with everything from bicycles to antique clocks. The bell chimed as she entered. The man behind the counter looked to be in his 60s. He had wire-rimmed glasses, a bald spot, and a friendly face worn by years of watching people part with their treasures. Vivian placed the pouch on the counter and waited. As he began appraising the items, Vivian wandered. She didn't like standing still. Her eyes drifted along the shelves, old radios, wristwatches, dusty picture frames. Then something caught her eye. On the second shelf of a locked display case, folded neatly and stacked with a few other vintage garments, was a white choir robe. Her breath caught. She moved closer. The robe was old, yellowed slightly with time, but well preserved. It had a tiny hand-sewn repair on the left sleeve. A crooked little cross stitch, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Vivian was looking for it. Her hand pressed against the glass. Her voice trembled. Where did you get that? Mr. Rowe looked up. Which one? The robe. That one. The white one. He walked over, adjusted his glasses, looked where she pointed. Oh, that. Came in with a donation box. Years ago. Back of the shop was packed with all sorts of old things. I kept it because I don't know. Something about it. Vivian swallowed hard. Her eyes stung. Her knees felt weak. I sewed that, she whispered. That stitch. My daughter ripped it on a fence. Mr. Rowe blinked, confused. Is she with you now? Vivian shook her head slowly. She's been missing since 1985. A long silence settled between them. Then Mr. Rowe said softly, Maybe it's time someone took a real look. And for the first time in 18 years, Vivian felt something shift. Not closure, not relief, but the faintest breath of movement in the silence. Vivian stood frozen in the center of C, Roe and Son's pawn and trade, her eyes locked on the folded white robe behind the glass. The shop seemed to vanish around her. There was only the robe, only that crooked little stitch she remembered sewing nearly 2 decades ago. Her hands trembled as she pointed again, needing confirmation even though her heart already knew. "I sewed that cross," she said, voice low. "It tore on a gate. I fixed it the night before she wore it." She was so proud. She said it made her look grown. Mr. Robe blinked slowly behind his glasses. "Your daughter?" Vivian nodded. "Felicia Monroe. She was 16. She left for church in that robe in 1985 and never came home." The air in the shop grew still. Mr. Rose stepped out from behind the counter and unlocked the display case with a quiet clink of brass keys. He handled the robe gently, like something sacred, and laid it across the glass counter. Vivian reached out, brushing her fingers over the fabric, confirming every detail. The hem, the hand-stitched cross, even a faint yellowed thread near the collar. "Where did it come from?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Mr. Rowe scratched his head. "Truth is, I don't rightly recall. We get estate donations sometimes. Boxes of old items when folks pass on or move into assisted living. Could have come in a decade ago or more. Some stuff just stays buried in the back until we get time to sort." Vivian gripped the edge of the counter. "Do you keep records? Names? Receipts? Only for high-value items, ma'am. That robe came in with old hymnals and vintage hats. Just a miscellaneous lot. Sorry." She nodded, swallowing disappointment. Still, this was more than she'd had in 18 years. Mr. Rose studied her. "Do you want to take it?" Vivian shook her head slowly. "Not yet. This might mean something. I need someone to see it. Someone who'll do right by her." She didn't go home. She took the bus straight to the police station. The building hadn't changed much. The walls were still beige and peeling, the desk sergeant still preoccupied with a crossword puzzle. But Vivian didn't wait this time. She asked to speak with someone in cold cases. She refused to sit down until someone came. 2 hours later, a woman stepped into the lobby. Black, mid-40s, wearing a plain gray blazer and a badge clipped to her hip. Her posture was straight, her eyes direct, but not unkind. "Mrs. Monroe?" she asked. "I'm Detective Chantal Moreau. I was told you brought something in." Vivian stood, holding the robe like a cradle. "This belonged to my daughter. She disappeared in 1985. They never found anything. But I just found this. In a pawn shop." Detective Moreau gestured to a private room. Once inside, Vivian laid the robe on the table. Moreau put on gloves and examined it carefully, her brows tightening as she saw the age of the fabric, the stitch, the faint discoloration. "My God," she murmured, "this really is that old. I've kept her room the same. That stitch? I made it myself. I know it anywhere." Moreau sat down, folding her hands. "I wasn't in Franklin Hollow in 85. I was a kid myself, but I've been reviewing cold files. I remember seeing your daughter's name." Vivian stared at her. "Then you know what they did. Or didn't do?" Moreau nodded solemnly. "Yes, I read the report. It was dismissive. Offensive, really. They logged her as a presumed runaway with troubled tendencies based on absolutely nothing. She was going to church," Vivian said. "She had her Bible in one hand and a sandwich in the other." "I believe you." Vivian's shoulders sagged. "That robe means something. Someone kept it. It wasn't discarded. It wasn't tossed. It was folded, preserved, like a trophy." Moreau didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened a new file and began typing. She wrote down the pawn shop's address, the owner's name, and took photos of the robe with a small digital camera. "May I keep this for forensic analysis?" she asked. "I'll log it as evidence and preserve it exactly as it is." Vivian nodded, hesitant but trusting. "You really mean to investigate this?" "I do. Because you're right, it was kept. Someone valued it. That means someone remembers her. Someone knows something." Vivian's eyes filled. "For 18 years, no one said that to me. No one meant it." "You're not alone anymore," Moreau said. Let's bring her home. In the following days, Moreau launched a quiet inquiry. She returned to the pawn shop and interviewed Mr. Rowe at length. He offered to help in any way, even pulling out old ledgers from the early 90s. Nothing definitive, but one entry stood out: an estate sale purchase in 1992 from a man named Everett Langford. The name meant nothing to Rowe at the time, but it was enough for Moreau to investigate further. Langford had died in 1991, a church custodian, lived alone in a modest shotgun house in the Franklin Hollow outskirts. No wife, no children, known to be quiet, kept mostly to himself. Moreau obtained his old address and went to the property. It had been sold, foreclosed, resold again. Now stood abandoned, boarded up, overgrown. She jotted down a note to return with a search warrant if the robe yielded anything usable. Meanwhile, she sent the choir robe to the crime lab. Fibers, skin cells, hair, anything that could still linger. The lab tech was skeptical at first. Nearly 2 decades old, he muttered. Don't get your hopes up. Moreau got her hopes up anyway. She also reopened Felicia's original file, photographing every page. She circled the statement from Miss Clarabelle, the neighbor who mentioned the green van, and marked it as a critical lead ignored in 1985. She pulled property records for that stretch of sycamore and began sketching a map of known residents from that time. Back at home, Vivian didn't sleep. She sat in the living room with Felicia's yearbook in her lap and the TV on mute. A strange feeling had taken hold. Not closure, not comfort, but movement. After so long in the stillness, even the smallest ripple felt like a flood. And late that night, when the phone rang and Detective Moreau's voice said, "We may have found something," Vivian held her breath. Because for the first time in 18 years, someone was following the thread. And maybe, just maybe, it would lead her back to Felicia. Vivian sat by the phone with her hands clasped tight, elbows resting on her knees, the same way she had waited in 1985 for someone to tell her anything. Back then, the silence had been merciless. But now, finally, Detective Chantal Moreau was speaking, and every word felt like oxygen. "We've confirmed something," Moreau said on the line. The robe had 2 distinct hairs embedded in the inner collar seam. One matches Felicia's profile from the brush sample you gave us. The second is not hers, and it's not yours either. We got a partial DNA profile. Vivian closed her eyes. So it was kept. By someone. Yes, this wasn't discarded. It wasn't damaged. Whoever had it valued it, preserved it. Vivian's voice broke. Like a keepsake. Moreau didn't answer that directly. We ran the unknown profile through Cody's. We got a familial hit. Not a full match, but close. The partial belongs to a man with a brother who lived in Franklin Hollow until the early 1990s. Vivian sat up straighter. "Oh, Everett Langford." Vivian blinked. "The janitor?" Moreau nodded. "Church custodian. Lived alone. His name came up in connection with the pawn shop inventory. The robe may have come from a bulk estate donation after his death." Vivian's mind reeled. She remembered Everett. Older, quiet, always respectful, never much conversation. She'd never once thought of him as dangerous. Did he? Vivian's throat caught. Was he ever investigated? No, Moreau said. He passed in 91. No criminal record. But we pulled work records. He was employed at 3 churches across 2 counties. Always part-time. Always in janitorial or groundskeeping roles. And one of those churches also had a missing child in 1983. Case went cold. Child was never found. Girl named Rena Cummings. 8 years old. Vivian's breath hitched. Did anyone connect them? No one did. Separate jurisdictions. Separate decades. But I've requested her case file. Moreau's voice dropped lower. I want to search Langford's old property. It's been vacant for years, but the owners signed off. There's still a storage shed in the back. It's locked and covered in brush. Vivian didn't ask to come. She simply said, "Please, don't stop." The next morning, Moreau arrived at the Langford house with a forensic team. The yard was a mess of weeds, rusted fencing, and sagging plywood. The shed stood stubborn and sealed, padlocked shut. It took bolt cutters and a good shove to get it open. Inside, the air was sour and still. Cobwebs stretched across ceiling beams. Dust coated everything. But what mattered wasn't the mess. It was the trunk in the corner, an old cedar chest carved with faint religious motifs. When they opened it, the team fell silent. Inside were relics: a nun's veil, a small boy's red altar sash, a pressed pair of white gloves labeled confirmation, and another choir robe, this one smaller, pink-stitched with a faded name tag reading R. Cummings. Moreau knelt beside the chest. Her hands shook as she lifted out each item, each one carefully folded, preserved. The trophies of someone who didn't just abduct, someone who curated innocence. She called Vivian that night, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's more than Felicia." Vivian didn't speak for a long time. Then, quietly, "I knew it. In my bones, I knew it wasn't random. My baby, she was chosen." Back at the precinct, Moreau launched a task force. She combed through Langford's employment history, requesting personnel files, incident logs, and any disciplinary reports. One church noted that he was dismissed abruptly in 1984 for inappropriate conduct, though no police report was filed. The file included a vague statement from a teenage girl who had felt uncomfortable around him. But nothing ever came of it. He simply moved on. Meanwhile, the robe evidence deepened. Luminol testing on Felicia's robe revealed faint traces of blood inside the hem, too degraded for typing, but consistent with blunt force trauma. And then came the final blow. A local contractor, hired to assess structural damage on the Langford property, noticed something strange in the crawl space beneath the shed. A slab of concrete, irregular and patched with different soil. The forensic team returned. They excavated slowly, carefully. By sunset, they had uncovered skeletal remains. Partial, fragile. Clothing remnants clung to what was left, fragments of white cotton and a metal zipper. A set of teeth still intact. A tiny gold ring with an F engraved inside. Dental records confirmed the truth. It was Felicia. The news hit Vivian like a storm. There was relief, but not the kind she expected. It came with grief, with rage, with an ache deeper than anything she'd carried before. She had begged the world to look, and now finally it had. Franklin Hollow woke up too late. When the police department held a press conference, Vivian didn't attend. But Detective Moreau did. She stood at the podium and said the words the department never said in 1985. "We failed this family. We failed Felicia Monroe. We did not listen. We did not act. And because of that, she was never given a chance." In her home, Vivian sat by the window, listening to the TV on low volume. She clutched Felicia's Bible in her hands. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears left. The next Sunday, Zion AME held a service in Felicia's name. The youth choir sang her favorite hymn, and for the first time in 18 years, that empty chair in the front row was filled with a white robe, neatly draped, and a single lily placed in her memory. Vivian watched from the pew, hands folded, heart still. She had waited nearly 2 decades. Now, Felicia was coming home. The town of Franklin Hollow was not ready for what came next. Detective Chantal Moreau had always known there were gaps in the cold files, especially the ones that collected dust from the 1980s. But this case, the quiet horror unfolding from the discovery of Felicia Monroe's choir robe, was exposing something older and darker than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about a missing girl anymore. It was about what had been allowed to happen, and who had allowed it. After positively identifying Felicia's remains, Moreau pushed to investigate the full extent of Everett Langford's life. She wasn't satisfied with just knowing what happened. She needed to understand who he had been when the world wasn't looking. The profile forming around him was chilling. Langford had worked at 4 churches over a span of 15 years. Each job lasted no more than 2 to 3 years. His references were vague, sometimes forged. No one remembered ever interviewing him thoroughly. No background checks had been done. Just a man with a broom and a cross on his lapel, soft-spoken and reliable. Moreau reached out to every church and every former staff member who was still alive. Many couldn't remember much. Others remembered too well. One deacon, now retired and living in Mobile, recalled Langford locking himself in the basement of the church for hours on Saturdays, claiming to be cleaning the archives. A former secretary admitted she once saw Langford walking a little girl to her parents' car after choir practice and felt something wrong in her gut, but she said nothing. It was the 80s, she told Moreau, voice cracking. You didn't question a man of the church. Most damning of all was a box of letters found in Langford's attic, kept by a distant relative who now agreed to surrender them. Inside were church bulletins, cutouts of missing persons ads, and handwritten notes. She was perfect, so pure in her song. I still hear her voice in my dreams. They were undated. None mentioned Felicia by name, but Moreau recognized the phrases. The way he spoke of innocence, not with love but with obsession, possession. She brought them to Vivian. Vivian held them in silence, then set them down. You found him too late, she said softly. I know, Moreau replied. He got to live and die with his secrets. He won't be remembered for them now, Moreau said. Not anymore. The town responded in ripples. Zion AME held a memorial for Felicia and Rena Cummings, the little girl believed to be another of Langford's victims. Their families were invited to stand at the altar, where the choir sang under soft gold light. Vivian didn't speak at the service. She simply lit a candle and placed Felicia's locket, a tiny gold heart, beside her daughter's folded robe on the altar. A local journalist, the same one who'd ignored Vivian's story in the 80s, reached out requesting an interview. Vivian declined. I already said what mattered. 18 years ago. No one listened. But when the city council proposed renaming a small community park Felicia Monroe Memorial Garden, she agreed. Not because she needed the recognition, but because she wanted her daughter's name spoken by children playing in the sunlight, not whispered in fear. Detective Moreau submitted a final case summary in January 2004. It included the confirmed identity of Felicia Monroe's remains, the preserved trophies in Langford's possession, the forensic timeline, and the identified DNA match from Langford's brother, now deceased. It ended with a recommendation to cross-reference Langford's employment history with all unsolved child disappearances within a 50-mile radius between 1975 and 1990. She made sure that part was underlined. Vivian kept Felicia's robe. It had been cleaned, gently pressed, and folded again, this time by her own hands. She placed it in a cedar box at the foot of her bed. It no longer smelled of starch or sunlight, but it was hers again. Sometimes she would take it out and sit with it in her lap, running her hand across the stitch she had sewn all those years ago. She never cried when she held it. The tears had come and gone. What remained now was something deeper. Reverence. One evening in the spring of 2004, Vivian stood outside her home, watching a group of girls walking to choir practice in matching white robes. Their voices carried through the dusk, light and unburdened. One of the girls waved at her. Hi, Miss Monroe. Vivian smiled gently and waved back. After they disappeared down the block, she whispered, sing for her too. And then she went inside. In her room, on the windowsill, sat a photo of Felicia, 16, radiant, caught mid-laugh in her choir robe with the cross stitched crooked on her sleeve. Vivian looked at her daughter's face. You came home to me, she said softly, and I never stopped waiting.